Okay, so maybe I'll expand on that a bit. Since way back during the presidential campaign in 2015 and 2016, oh, remember that? When Trump wasn't president yet? Anyway, since way back then, supporters of Donald Trump have been trying to explain and excuse his erratic behavior, his lack of discipline, his lack of expertise, his boastfulness, his petulance, his tendency to say outrageous and insulting things, and pretty much everything else he ever says and does by insisting that Trump is not the vapid bore he appears to be, but is actually a brilliant manipulator who is always 10 steps ahead of everyone else. There are a few problems with this theory. Some of these problems are specific to Trump, some are of a more general nature. I'll go through both kinds, but let's start with why the Trump is actually a secret genius theory is fundamentally flawed. The basic idea here is that all the seeming chaos being created by Trump is actually his very intentional and skillful way of getting his enemies to pay attention to what he wants them to pay attention to. Now, that isn't such an unbelievable idea on the face of it. It would require that Donald Trump's entire 40-plus year public life as a gullible, bigoted, corrupt, conspiracy-minded chauvinist has been an elaborate performance, not representative of who he really is. But hey, back in the day, pro wrestlers used to live their gimmicks, sometimes for decades. George the Animal Steele was actually a soft-spoken high school teacher, so it's possible. Possible, but extremely unlikely. Made even more so by Trump's lackluster record as president so far. And to start with, I'm not even talking about the corruption, the obstruction of justice, the racists and misogynists and xenophobes working in the White House crafting policy. I just mean things Trump has tried to do and actually gotten done since taking office. It's a short list. There's a reason, beyond his cartoonishly overinflated ego, that Trump is still bragging about his victory in the 2016 election nearly 2 years later. Getting elected president is still his most significant accomplishment. Everything since then has been downhill. Even though he's a Republican president with a Republican-controlled Congress, Trump's legislative achievements are paltry at best. The only major bill to be passed and signed during his administration so far has been the tax reform bill, and that took almost the entire first year of his presidency to get done. The Republicans also tried and failed to repeal the Affordable Care Act multiple times, despite doing so being one of Trump's signature campaign promises. And let's also remember that his national security advisor was forced to resign less than a month into his administration, his press secretary resigned after only 6 months, and he's already had 4 communications directors, the last of whom left at the end of March and has not yet been replaced. If Trump actually were the master manipulator that his most ardent supporters say he is, if he truly were playing 4-dimensional chess while his enemies were playing checkers, wouldn't he have more to show for it by now than one significant piece of legislation? Shouldn't the apparent chaos be yielding more tangible successes, if that's been the point of it all along? And Trump really is that good? Of course, if you listen to Trump, he's in the middle of the most productive and successful presidency in history. Dying industries are being revitalized, and the United States is more respected in the international community than we've ever been. The fact that both of these claims are easily proven false doesn't strengthen the case for Trump the secret genius. Is being regularly, demonstrably dishonest part of Trump's master plan too? Because he doesn't just tread the line between truth and falsehood as many politicians do. He doesn't practice mere puffery when touting his supposed accomplishments. He lies. He lies constantly. He lies repeatedly. He tells obvious, provable lies about all sorts of things on a daily basis. Is he following some meticulously planned, carefully executed strategy that involves making us think he's shamelessly, compulsively untruthful? Or is he just a liar? Sorry, I made that sound like a rhetorical question just now. I didn't mean it to be. He's a liar. That's what he is. He's a liar. But enough about Trump. There's a larger concern related to this Trump is a 4D chess master nonsense. These attempts to reframe Trump's weakness and incompetence as misunderstood strength and skill are examples of an irritating and potentially dangerous form of pseudo-philosophy I've encountered throughout my life. You've probably seen it too. It's common on the internet, but it's also way, way older than that. It's the notion that hard work, training, education, and discipline are for suckers, that real geniuses don't need any of that. They don't need to put forth an effort to be great. They just are great. Some of this is our own fault. Our popular culture has done a great job conditioning us to think of genius as something intuitive, epiphanic. Mozart was a musical genius who devised entire compositions in his head and then simply wrote them down. Sherlock Holmes is the world's greatest detective who can deduce the solution to the most complex problems by observing a handful of seemingly mundane details. Luke Skywalker finds his target on the Death Star by turning off his computer and trusting his feelings. In reality, while Mozart was a gifted improviser and seemed to have a pretty good memory, his process of musical composition relied just as much on experimentation and revision as anyone else's. Sherlock Holmes is a fictional detective. Real police work is a time-consuming and often frustrating process. Some cases are never solved, and most that are solved through accumulating physical evidence, carefully interviewing witnesses and suspects, and drawing precise, thoroughly supported conclusions. And it's worth noting that even Sherlock Holmes himself has occasionally admonished his partner and biographer Dr. Watson for making his powers of deduction seem more impressive than they actually are. Luke Skywalker is also a make-believe person, and hopefully it goes without saying that flying an aircraft and hitting things that you shoot at from that aircraft require more than trusting your feelings. Let's also remember that Luke's natural abilities only got him so far. He still needed to train and practice in order to grow from the impetuous farm boy in Star Wars to the grizzled badass capable of psychically projecting himself across the galaxy in The Last Jedi. It's not the months, years, or decades of hard work and training and practice that led to the moment of genius that we remember. It's the moment itself. That allows us to believe the fantasy that the moment was conjured from thin air, that genius is something natural and effortless. And for some of us, it also allows us to embrace the vanity that we can be, or we already are, brilliant in that very same way. Here's the thing, hard work and discipline are qualities that we readily admire in other people. But most of us discover pretty early on in life that they're not much fun when experienced from the first-person perspective. Discipline is a demanding thing, and hard work is, well, hard. It's much more appealing to imagine that you don't need to put in the work, that you can just be great at something. I totally get it. It's one reason why I chose to study English rather than a more demanding mathematical or scientific discipline. It's much easier to learn how to write and speak so that you sound smart than it is to put in the years of hard work and study necessary to actually be smart. I'm kidding, of course. An education focused on English, literature, or composition is plenty challenging and demanding. So if you're getting ready to start college in the fall and you're trying to find a program where you can just sleepwalk through the next 4 years and collect your diploma without having to put forth any real effort, don't choose English. Choose business administration. My point is this, when someone is really good at something, it's almost always because they've been practicing that something for a long time. Yes, they may have started with a natural aptitude for it, but that natural aptitude is almost never enough. It almost never comes easy. People who are really good at stuff are good because they've put in the work to get good. And those are the people who are actually really good at something. There are way more people who aren't really good at anything, but who have convinced themselves that they are because they think that's how it works. They think they can be comedians because They find themselves funny. They think they're master manipulators because people get offended when they say deliberately offensive things. They think they're masters of rhetoric and debate because most people who disagree with them know better than to argue with them. They're crass and insensitive, but they see themselves as plain-spoken and forthright. When they make mistakes, those aren't really mistakes. They meant to do that. And when they're confronted on their lack of preparation, they spin that into a virtue too. Craft matters. Skills require training. Knowledge requires study. Experience counts. Almost everyone who actually is a genius got to be that way because they worked at it, because they dedicated their lives to training and improving their abilities, be those abilities physical or mental. People who fancy themselves exceptions to this rule, who seek to present their laziness as cleverness and their conceit as confidence, are easily spotted by those of us who know what we're looking for, especially we who have recognized the telltale signs in the mirror a time or two. No matter if it's a claim someone else makes or a claim you desperately want to be true about yourself, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Don't listen to people who tell you that their ineptitude is actually brilliance. Don't believe people who tell you that attitude is a substitute for preparation. Talented, skillful, brilliant people got that way because they worked at it. And they aren't easily mistaken for graceless, feckless buffoons.